Hello everyone, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Douglas Johnson. I am a certified yoga teacher, kirtan artist, ordained minister. And if you're interested in spirituality and spiritual topics, then you're in the right place. Please subscribe. If you get something from this video, like it, share it with others, and be sure to comment and share your experience. All of those things do help out. Today I wanted to talk a bit about the power of impermanence. But before I do that, I do want to thank everyone who contributes to make these talks possible. I don't have a lot of resources or extra time or energy, and so in order for me to create these talks and buy the equipment necessary and take the time, it does require a financial contribution. So the people that make that possible are my patrons on Patreon. So if you'd like to become a part of that community, please do check out the links in the video description below. You can also make one-time contributions if you'd like via PayPal or Venmo. Okay, so the power of impermanence. In my last talk, I shared a little bit about it's okay to not know what's coming next or what's next for you. And this relates with many things that I've been practicing over the last year. The last year, 2023, was maybe the most challenging year for me since my latest awakening experience, the last big one anyway, where I started teaching professionally and many things shifted and changed in my life. And it was a big moment of surrender. It was a big moment of realizing that I didn't know how to make myself happy. I didn't know how to serve others. I really was in a place where I was very surrendered. And I simply said to the universe or to God or to Spirit, and I said, what would you like me to do? How can I be of service? How can I live a valuable life? What would I do? What would that look like? And very quickly, within short order, I was teaching yoga professionally. And so that was the answer that came. But I think that answer only came, even though my whole life had been searching for an answer like that. I think that answer only came from my level of surrender, the level that I was willing to let go of thinking that I knew the answer or thinking I knew what was supposed to happen. So that surrender, our willingness to surrender like that, is very powerful. When we are in a time of struggle, of suffering, and I know in the traditions it talks about the end of suffering and things like this, and who knows, perhaps it's possible to get to a point or a place where suffering never returns. But the question I have for anyone who believes that that's what they've achieved, because I know I have, and other people who have had spiritual awakenings also believe they achieved that. The trouble is we don't know what we don't know. And we don't know what the future holds. So I might have in a very powerful awakening experience, which I have had. I might go through weeks, months, years, or even decades of not experiencing conventional suffering. Life will have its ups and downs, but there's no real suffering involved. I've had that. Others have had that. It's very tempting to believe and to say, well, I found the solution to suffering. I found the end of all suffering. Suffering is over for me. Maybe, but it could just be that you've not experienced any suffering in a long time. So this is where I find this kind of talk in spirituality problematic. I know it's very tempting to do, and I know it's very tempting to believe. If a teacher stands up and says, hey, yeah, I don't suffer, I've found the solution, here it is. Very, very tempting to buy into that and to believe that. And I'm not saying that perhaps someone hasn't. Maybe they have. But again, the question always is, how do we know? Because we don't know what we don't know, and we won't experience suffering until we do. So we can have long periods of glorious experiences with no suffering for maybe lifetimes even, right? The tradition talks about things like that. Accumulating good karma and experiencing a heaven-like state for lifetimes, but then eventually exhausting that good karma and then falling back into a sort of demonic state. So, for me personally, I've gone through a very long period of bliss and joy that was not caused by my circumstances in life. It just sort of was there in the background constantly. And then the pandemic hit, that didn't diminish that. I still felt connected with that. And I felt connected with that all the way through the pandemic, pretty much all the way through until maybe last year. And then last year I began to experience for the first time in a very long time what I would call suffering. So I began to experience, emotional turmoil and pain that, while on the surface it was tied to things that were maybe happening in my life, I knew this was like a deeper spiritual crisis that was happening here. And so I began having to introspect more and inquire more and be still and practice these sorts of things. And in that, I've rediscovered sort of the power of impermanence, which is what today's talk is basically about. Now, impermanence is a Buddhist concept, but just because Buddhists are the ones who sort of laid out impermanence or talked about it maybe the most, or maybe they were the first ones to sort of highlight it, the things that I tend to talk about are usually just spiritual truths. So it's not, I don't care too much about where spiritual truth, which tradition it comes from, because different traditions will hit upon different elements of truth. I'm not looking to be a Buddhist or a Christian or a Taoist or a Hindu, or I'm not looking to identify with any kind of a label, because for me that's not important. What's important is truth and joy, peace, the end of suffering. So whatever gets me there, whatever tradition, whatever teaching, that's what I'm interested in. So impermanence, in my experience, is very true. The basic premise or idea is that all things are impermanent. Doesn't matter if it's a quote-unquote good experience or bad experience. It is transient. It is coming and going. And according to Buddhist teaching, the basic idea is that we create suffering when we try and hold on to an experience that is temporary, or we try and avoid an experience that really can't be avoided, right? Like something like death, right? Impermanence, death would be a part of that, that this is coming for all of us who are embodied as human beings. The death of the body is pretty much guaranteed, it's insured. It's just a matter of time. So how long until this occurs? So impermanence, it's like fire. It's not good or bad, right? If you are suffering, it can be a very good thing. If you're enjoying a experience or something, then it can seem like a bad thing because that thing will be taken away from you. But today I wanted to explore a little bit about the good, quote unquote, good side of it. When we are suffering, when we are in a dark night, when things look bleak and dark, we can take solace and we can find a sense of hope in the fact that our experience is impermanent. And this has been my experience. It doesn't matter how difficult a situation has been in my life or how much suffering there has been. I can always look back at a later point and say, well, it felt like that would never end, or that I would never feel differently, or that I could never experience joy or peace again. And yet, there I was experiencing it. So I think most of us have had experiences like that, where we can look back and say, okay, things were not as dire or bad as perhaps they had seemed at the time. So this can be very comforting if we're going through a difficult time, like the one that I've been in. And I seem to emerge from these experiences, and then it feels like it comes back to a degree, and then I emerge. But each time I feel like I'm moving up. So it's kind of like a wave, but it's like a stair-step motion. And I think many of you are experiencing similar things. I was talking with a longtime student of mine the other day at lunch, and she was saying, yes, I really think that what you're going through, what others are going through, is more global. So I don't disagree. I think that there definitely is something in the air that makes this a challenging time for us as human beings. So regardless of whether or not you're finding this particular time challenging, I think that most of us as human beings will have periods that are challenging, whether we're going through one at the moment or not. So when we are experiencing that, this idea of impermanence can be very, very comforting. Now, there's one key element that I want to draw your attention to when it comes to this principle that can make it feel like certain things are permanent. And that principle is one I've spoken about before, and it is the idea of what we resist persists. Now, I'm not really quite sure metaphysically why this is the case. There seems to be some kind of universal principle that when you are pushing against an experience, it tends to energize that experience. Law of attraction people might say, well, you're bringing it to your attention, and so then you're actually drawing more of it to you. I don't know whether that is accurate or not, or that's the mechanism at play, but it certainly, in my experience, feels to be true that if we resist an experience, we almost freeze that experience. It's like the experience, all experience, this is the idea behind impermanence, is in a kind of a flow. So things are coming and going into our experience, our awareness. This is the natural order of things. Now, when we say no to something, and we try and not experience it or see it, however we do that, it's almost as if on a universal level that's not allowed, for lack of a better way of putting it. I don't know why. I'm not sure, you know, what mechanisms at play there, but it basically seems like, because our true nature is awareness, if we try and deny our true nature, right, which is awareness, so if I say I don't want to be aware of that, I don't want to see that, I don't want to experience that, and this is inwardly. So I'm not talking about outwardly. You know, maybe you don't want to go see a movie. It's not like that's going to come and haunt you or something like that. It's an inner resistance where inwardly we are emotionally or energetically, we're trying to say, no, no, I can't experience that. I won't experience that. So that could be, it's usually something traumatic. So it could be a divorce, it could be a death, it could be illness, it could be getting your heart broken, it could be any number of things, but it's something that you are basically saying, nope, I don't want to experience that. So the odd thing is that seems to take something that is fluid and moving and dynamic, and it seems to freeze it. And to some degree, that's what trauma is from this perspective. But even if we don't create trauma around something, we seem to slow down or even stop this principle of impermanence. Now, not really, but it can really feel that way. It can feel like, what is going on? Like, why is this experience just lingering and lingering and lingering and lingering? And this explains why, more often than not, it seems like good, quote unquote, experiences seem to just fly by, and why bad, quote unquote, unpleasant experiences seem to linger. Because we as human beings have a tendency to emotionally and energetically resist experiences that we find unpleasant, and then we don't resist experiences we do find pleasant. And so those experiences just go right through, as they are meant to. And you could say that the quote-unquote bad experiences are also meant to do the same, except that we usually will resist them on some level. We'll resist, we'll also start to replay and think about and ruminate about and create all kinds of, put a lot of energy into the negative experiences. So the long and short of this is that we can really take advantage of the power of impermanence through the practice of surrender, of letting go. And this is really the essence of a lot of mindfulness practices, which is not judging and just allowing things into our experience more fully. Gratitude is another very powerful principle when it comes to letting go of that resistance. So we may find that perhaps if we look at our life in total, we find that there's something very, very pressing that feels oppressive and feels like we're suffering because of it. But chances are, if we were to slow down and think about things for a moment, we find that there's a lot more going right in our life than there is going wrong. Now, I know there are exceptions, and we can address those exceptions spiritually too, all right? But for most people, most of the time, there may be a thing or a few things that feel really off in their life. There is in my life, and that's been the source of the suffering, is those things that seem like they're not quite right. But anytime I slow down to think about my life, I live a very blessed life. There's so much that is beautiful and is quote unquote right in my life. It would be very difficult to complain about the way things are. So just because everything isn't exactly as I'd like it to be, doesn't mean that I should be suffering. And yet the ego has a talent for doing just that. Basically saying, because I don't have this one thing, I cannot experience peace, I cannot experience joy, I'm going to suffer. And that really isn't true. So, impermanence. Again, in my experience, it is just simply a statement of truth. All things are impermanent. Whether we like or dislike an experience, it's impermanent. It's coming and going, just like everything else. The frequency, or how quickly things seem to come and go, in my experience, seems to be directly related with how much resistance we have to the experience. The tantrics would say that we, again, as awareness, which is our true nature, as awareness, we digest an experience, we let it flow through us by having that experience. So again, to the degree that I am trying to say, no, I'm not going to fully feel or have this experience, then it's like I'm slowing it down. It's almost like having a sieve or colander or something that is sifting, okay? And so if you open up wide as awareness and you say, come on, give it to me, give me your best shot, then it's like all that energy of that experience can just move right through you, and it can very quickly be processed or experienced, or digested is another word that the tantrics might use. However, when we say, nope, or I'm only going to experience a little bit of this, or I can only feel these things or acknowledge these things, then it's like the experience is trying to move through, but it can't. And so it moves very slowly. It seems to slow down, maybe almost become still. And again, this is where it seems like impermanence isn't happening. Like, why is the bad experience lingering? Why is the experience I don't like, why is it still here? Why isn't it going away? Well, because we haven't opened up completely. And you may think you have. That's part of the trick, is it might feel like we have opened up. It might feel like we have surrendered. It might feel like we've let go completely. But chances are, if an experience is lingering like that, or I won't even say the experience, it's much more about the suffering, because this is what we really care about as human beings, the suffering. You know, if I lose a limb, the experience of not having my limb may never go away, but my experience of suffering over that can come and go. And this is what really matters, is whether we're suffering or not. So when we're saying no, we're slowing those things down, and those experiences, those feelings, they linger. When we open up wide, it's like it can flow right through, and then the suffering seems to stop much more quickly as a result. So this is something that I hope will be useful for you in your experience. If something is lingering like that, suffering, can you begin to inquire about where you might be creating resistance inwardly, mentally, emotionally, psychologically? What are you saying no to? What do you find unacceptable? What are you maybe hiding from yourself about your experience, about yourself, about the past, about reality? What are you perhaps not admitting to yourself? These are good places to look for hidden resistance. And in my experience, when we find these things, this is when that flow returns and we begin to experience that joy. To me, it feels that we suffer because there's just this flow of love. This is all that exists, is what we could call divine love. Everything is an expression of it, everything, without exception. I know that it seems like the world has these absolutely terrible, horrible things in it, and I get that that's a very real experience for many people, but to a large extent, the spiritual journey is one of realizing that that's not really actually what's going on here. So when it really boils down to it, there is this flow of divine love, of spiritual energy, and it's a beautiful thing. And again, to the degree that we do not see that, we will say no to certain things. We'll say, well, all of this is beautiful and divine, but not over here. This is ugly, and I don't want to experience this. I say no to that. Well, then we're starting to experience what I'm talking about, which is that slowing down and freezing of the very things that we would rather not have that. And that's what we call suffering. We're the only ones really powerful enough to seemingly cut ourselves off from this divine flow. We actually can't in reality. We're never actually cut off. So things like a dark night of the soul, these types of experiences, these are perceptions or experiences that we have, but they're not reality. We can't really be cut off from the divine. We can't really be separated from our true nature. But we can feel like we are, and we can have the experience of being cut off. So that's the amazing thing, is we're so powerful as beings that we can experience what cannot actually be true, but we can still create that experience or have that experience, a semblance of it. So this is what we tend to feel when we are saying no, when we are trying to stop impermanence, right? We're trying to not allow something to move through that wants to move through our awareness. And again, this goes against our true nature, which is to be aware, which is awareness. And awareness ultimately can't say no to anything. All right, everyone. I hope you found this helpful. If there are any questions, please leave them in the comments below. Again, I want to thank everyone who helps support these talks. It really does make this possible for me to do. And until next time, everyone, namaste and have a beautiful, beautiful day.